Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 36. Special Chassidus Teshuva Pre-Yom Kippur edition. Firstly, let me begin with wishing everyone a Gmar Chsim Teva, a good gebenched yar. I hope all our tefillas and all your tefillas reach the proper place of Rosh Hashanah and creating renewal and bringing in a new energy and a keli, a container for the new energy of the new year. And Bar Nechayim Mezena Revicha, for nachas from children, blessings with children, Chassidish nachas, Yiddish nachas, and of course life and good health, and abundant parnasa, both material and spiritual. If MyLife Chassidus Applied is important all year round, how much more so is it in this unique period of the year? What we call the Yom Neroyim, Tishrei, Chedesh Hashvi, and all the qualities that are explained in Nigla and Chassidus about this rich month, which is considered to be the central nervous system of the entire year. Reish, like Reish Hashanah, Tishrei is also the word's letters Reishis. And the head is not just the beginning of the year, it's also the controlling force, the central nervous system. So, if all year round Chassidus teaches us how to apply the teachings of Torah in a way that's relevant personally, psychologically, emotionally, now even more so. The Gemara says on the pasuk, Dirsha Hashem be'imotzei karua b'yesei karev, that beseech God when he's found, when he's to be found, and call out to him when he's close, karev, near. So the Gemara asks, it says, B'chol kareinu alav. In Psukim it says you can reach God anytime, and obviously God is always there. So the Gemara answers, Kam b'yachid, kam b'tzibur. That what you're going to accomplish all year round that needs a tzibur, needs a minyan, needs a synergy of a group, every individual can reach now. And how much more so at tzibur in the 10 days of Teshuva. Chassidus explains this at length, that this is a period in time where the layers, the veils, the shrouds, the language of Chassidus, the parsois, the curtains, the shields, the different layers that do not always allow us and make it easy to access the divine, not from God's perspective, from our perspective, become more transparent. The doors open up. As we'll say, Yom Kippur, in the Ilis HaSha'arim, all the doors are open and they're about to be sealed and closed. So essentially all these layers either melt away or disappear or become more transparent and allow us to access that which we could not access as easy during the rest of the year. That's what Dirsha Hashem be'imotzi means, karua b'yesei karev. An example, a beautiful example Chassidus gives for this, which really drives the point home and I think sets the tone for our discussion in this episode, is the example of the Kiruv HaMoyer El HaNitzutz. It's based, obviously, the Alter Rebbe is the one that the Yassid Chassidus Chabad, so he explains all these ideas, but sometimes very bekitzer, very briefly. And the Mittler Rebbe elaborates on this in Derech Chaim and in other places, especially in the Maimorim that are connected to this period of time of the year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shabbos Shuvah, and Aseret Yemei Shuvah. As a matter of fact, there's an entire sefer of the Mittler Rebbe who published, the Rebbe that actually published Sfarim with names, Ateres Reish. So there's a section there on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Aseret Yemei Shuvah, Shabbos Shuvah, and he discusses these matters as well as Derech Chaim, Shari Tshuva, where he talks matters of Tshuva. So the analogy given is Kiruv HaMoyer El HaNitzutz, which you may have heard of, but let's spell it out in simple English. Think of it this way. Think of an orbit. An orbit. A soul is Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. It's the spark of the divine. Ner Hashem, the flame of God, is Nishmas Adam, is the soul of the human being. So each of us is a spark of a large mother flame. They call it the source flame. And then the neshama is sent through its journey, through the entire Seder Ishtalshalos, through the entire cosmic order, spiritual levels, all the way down to this earth. And we actually say it and recreate it every morning when we say, Neshama shenesata bi taherihi, ata barasa, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi, ata meshamra bi kirbi. So Chassidus explains, the Neshama shenesata taheri is on the highest levels of taheri, tahiri law, which is before the tzimtzum. or in the microcosm level, that's Atzilus the Klolos, or in the microcosm level, Atzilus the Protis, then Ata Barasa is Bria, the Klolos or the Protis. So we'll discuss that another time, the microcosm, macrocosm, but basically everything is microcosm, macrocosm in all of existence. And it travels, and Ata Yitzarta, Yitzira, and Ata Nafachta Bi, you instill it, you imbue it in me, you've imbued it in me, is an Asiya. Ata Meshamer Bekibi, that's where it needs protection. So this explains, that comes from the Ata, from the Etzem, protecting the neshama down below. But the soul goes through its journey. And essentially every morning when we wake up, the soul is refreshed because it went through, in some way, through that journey. But on an annual level, this happens on a far more macrocosmic and global scale. That the soul goes through its orbit all year round. When it comes closer to Tishrei, the soul, think of it like a planet that's getting closer to its source. The spark starts getting closer to its source. And as they get closer, as we see when a flame gets closer to a larger flame, it begins to be tugged. It begins to feel the tug and the pull of the other flame. And literally in a progressive way, through the month of Elul, when Melech Basada, the king is close and accessible to us, as we get closer to Rosh Hashanah, this tug gets stronger and stronger as the flame, which is our soul, is getting closer to its source. Rosh Hashanah, it's even at a closer point. And when is at its closest? Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur itself, and Ne'ilah, that last moment right before the sundown of Ne'ilah. So if you could visualize that, and think of yourself, close your eyes and think of your soul on a journey. And after Tishrei, the soul will be thrust again into its orbit, and it'll go into the winter months, as Chassidus explains, where it's more distant. Now again, distant is not God being distant from us not sensing the divine quite the same way. The spark is always connected to the source. But a sense, in a more revealed way, what we call in Giluyim, is far stronger in Tishrei because it's Kiruv HaMoyer El HaNitzutz. So the source is getting closer to the spark, and therefore the spark senses and feels that. And that's why we have different awakenings if we allow it. We always have free will. The Arizal says, Mishalei Bacha, someone that does not cry during the 10 days of Teshuva, his neshama is not complete. The Rebbe has a whole sikha on this. Which means, basically, what do you mean doesn't cry? Why? Because the neshama should be feeling that tug. And that existential feeling should create a certain existential angst that causes a person to cry. Like you ever find you start crying for no apparent reason. Not because something is questioning you, something's bothering you, but just a sense of either the loneliness of life or the pain of life or just the fact that there seems some type of disconnect where we sense something is not all the way there and something is all right and so on. So that is what happens during this month, and the period that we're right now, of course, is this Kiruv HaMoyer El HaNitzutz. So every day now, going from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, we're getting closer and closer. It's literally like a countdown. And the 10 days, should not surprise anyone, corresponds to the 10 spheres. Because as the neshama goes through the Elamis, I said, Atzilus Bri, Yitzir Asiya, each world is made up of 10 steps, 10 building blocks. So the worlds are dimensions, are paradigms. And the spheres are dimensions, are elements and building blocks, components in each one of them. So Atzilus is not Bria, but Bria has Chesed, just like Atzilus has Chesed. So the faculties of our soul, which evolve from the spheres of Yenis, like he says in Tanya, 2nd chapter, Nishtal Shlumehen, 3rd chapter, he's Nishtal Shlumehen, the 10 faculties of the person, are essentially the components of each particular universe. The elements, which are really the different dimensions and paradigms. So the 10 spheres are going from Chochmah to Malchus. Depending how you count, there's actually 2 opinions that Izal says you go Mamayla Lamata, that the Ramak says Mamata Lamayla. If any of you have seen my book 60 Days, I elaborate on that somewhat. But regardless, without going into all the detail, these are 10 building blocks that we're building what? Binyan HaMalchus. That's the language of Chassidus that happens in these days. So let me go right now to the first question, which is what I'm leading up to. What does Chassidus tell us about the 10 days of Teshuva and how they can be applied to our personal lives? Someone else phrased it, what personal lessons can be learned from the 10 days of Teshuva? And as I said, this is relevant all year round, every day of the year, especially holidays. But how much more so now when everyone does feel some, at least, interest to be more inspired and to be able to create some type of newness and change in our lives. This is the time of the year. And as the Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaKedesh Simin Yudalet, as I discussed last episode, there's an Ir Chodesh, there's a new energy that now is here 3 days old. It came in on the night of Rosh Hashanah, or on the day of Rosh Hashanah, and now we're after Shabbos Shuvah, it's the 4th day of this new energy. Do you feel new? Do you feel renewed? Or do you feel you're still a creature of habit, of past patterns and routines and so on? So now is the opportunity where all the energy you need is there. The challenge is for us to get out of our inertia and our status quo and our sometimes trapped and locked place and allow that energy to manifest. It says, Der Helach v'der ba. A generation comes, a generation goes. All the waters flow to the sea and it doesn't get filled. V'ein kol chodesh tachas hashemesh. Generation comes, a generation goes, and the continuation there in Kehelas, Ecclesiastes, and nothing is new under the sun. That's sad, the despondent statement. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So Chassidus says, Tachas Hashemesh, there's nothing new. Which means when you allow yourself to be controlled by the gravitational pull of this earth, which is Tachas Hashemesh, under the sun, beneath the sun, there's nothing new. It's all the old patterns. The sun rises, the sun sets, the moon rises, the moon sets. Lo yishbesu, the routine of nature, the routine of existence. But l'mayla min hashemesh, and we have the ability with our souls, because it's ner Hashem nishmas adam, it's a flame that comes from the divine that's higher than the shemesh, higher than the gravitational pull and tug of this world. That mother flame tugs us in the other direction, and if you're able to rise and transcend a little above the sun, metaphorically speaking, you can then experience chidush. And that's our challenge, and that's what we want to achieve. And on a personal level, therefore, this question is extremely important. What does Chassidus teach us? So I laid out what Chassidus tells us about the kiruv hamoral and nitzus, so we can imagine our soul right now. Whether you completely feel it or not is up to you. But there is a tug, and there is something that there's a certain awakening, a certain opening, and we see it not just in some circles, you see it across the board, how Jews react to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. It's almost irrational in a way, super rational, I should say, because there is that tug. But like anything, it can easily dissipate or easily be ignored if you don't do anything about it. So that's why we actually have work in these 10 days to build something. It's called Binyan HaMalchus. So in last episode, one of the questions, a number of questions came in, which was about, what does it mean God as king, Malchus in general? So I use the term dignity, sovereignty, dignity, Malchus, Malchusdik, to be Malchusdik. What is Malchusdik? Malchusdik means that we recognize there's only one Eibishter. HaMelech HaKodesh. Ad kedei kach, when you say Shemoneh Esrei, and there's some sections that we add in Aseret Yemei Teshuva, if you miss it, you don't have to say Shemoneh Esrei again. Melech HaKodesh, if you miss that, you have to say Shemoneh Esrei again. Why? Because there's something important, critical happening in this period of time. The whole Shemoneh Esrei, the whole 18 blessings in the weekdays, is some way invalidated if you don't recognize the Melech, not just HaKel HaKodesh, but HaMelech HaKodesh. So I discussed HaMelech is the concept that yes, we may not have physical kings today that we can see as Meshalem examples. That's why the Chassidim cried when they lost that example. But think of the idea of an absolute kingship. When you felt like a king yourself, in that type of state, the day you marry off a child, the day you yourself, a Daimel Melech, Daimel Malka, a Chosna Nakala, that day when you feel absolutely, not just euphoric and ecstatic, but also a sense of dignity, a sense of belonging, a sense of importance, not arrogance, but absolute necessity. You are critical. Well, all that comes from the Mokir of all this is the Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Eibishter is that. Mitziusim Atzmusi, like the Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaKedesh Simon Chof, he is the only true reality, an existence that must be because it is reality itself. It is not put there by anything else. Ein le'ila v'sibah chas v'shalom, it has no cause, causeless. And that endowed us with an element of Malchus. So we coronate God as king, which means we accept and we relate and we say, we are accepting you, the Melech Yachid, Elamim, the sole and only authority. This isn't meant to be in a form of a negative thing. It's the highest level possible to relate to an entity that's beyond everything and rules over everything. But the key thing is to emphasize a rule here, not the negative. He rules, commands, dominates, imposes. No. We're talking about an entity that is so real, that is beyond everything. And then He, God, that is endowed us with that malchus within us. And in these 10 days, we build that malchus. We build that dignity. What would a human being be like if you had wisdom, chachma bina das, wisdom, understanding and knowledge, or however people translate it, conception, comprehension, and resonance, different ways it's been explained. And the person had chesed, gvura, teferes. They had love, they had discipline, meaning a clear direction and guidance and seasoning, compassion, netzach chayid and yesod, ambition, endurance, determination, hod as in humility, a yielding, acknowledgement, and yesod, bonding. But a person didn't have dignity. Sometimes the way to appreciate something is by looking at what would we be like if we didn't have it. God forbid, when you see the eclipse of the sun, that shouldn't be a God forbid necessarily. The God forbid is that's a moshel I'm giving. When the eclipse of the sun reveals parts of the sun that you can't see on its own. When you see a person who's been deprived of dignity, when they've been humiliated or as children never given the dignity. You see, for example, a person, Rahman al-Islam, is homeless. There's something that is deeply demoralizing, something subhuman. When people are treated in a way where their dignity is violated or abused, something fundamental of our menschheit, of the humanness of who we are, is missing. That person could be brilliant, have chachma bina das, powerful chachma bina das, chesed, gvura, teferes, all the 9 faculties. But if they don't have malchus, if they don't have a mother that looked in their eyes and said, I love you unconditionally, you're absolutely necessary. The Eibishter put you and gave you as a gift to us to do something that only you can do, something sorely is lacking. In simple lingo, it could be self-esteem, you can call it self-confidence, but it's all a manifestation of malchus. And the interesting thing with malchus, like the moon, is less lamagar maklum. It doesn't have anything of its own. Because what is dignity? How do you define it? You can't buy it on the shelf. Chachma, you can go to school and you study. You have brains in your mind, then you actualize that potential. Every one of the other spheres is defined by what it is. Dignity is defined, and essentially not by what it is, but what it's not. What it's not is the opposite of that. Dignity is what the Mishnah in Pre-Yom says, that keser shem tov eila al gabein. A good name, a dignified name, is not something you can buy. It's not something you can gain anywhere. Once you do the right things, it automatically emerges. And this is a God-given right, birthright to each one of us. So in these 10 days, we build the malchus of the Eibishter, and malchus da'ara came malchus d'irkin, and we build the malchus in our own neshama. We are rebuilding a new structure because it's a new year, and we go through each of the spheres because malchus needs chachma, malchus needs bina, malchus needs das, and so on. In Derech Mitzvah in the mitzvah of Minei Melech, he talks about that David HaMelech is the epitome of malchus, which is bittul. And I sense that you are only a channel, a transparent channel of something greater than yourself. But that is too needs to have chachma. That's why David was a bar nafla. He would have been stillborn without having the years that Adam HaRishon and the Ovis gave him. Those years, they gave him the 10 spheres, because malchus on its own is like the moon. It needs the sunlight. But once it has it, what it reflects is far deeper than the sunlight. That's why it has its own power. Malchus goes to Kesed and so on. In simple English, it means that the core essence of being a renewed person after Rosh Hashanah, going into Yom Kippur, is having a sense of self. A sense of self, a divine gift that you have something to accomplish in this world. If you think you're insignificant, or you feel that you've been made insignificant, you've been trampled upon, you've been betrayed, you've been violated, you've been insulted, essentially your human dignity has been in some way abused, has been defiled, that is the core for all problems, the root of all problems. So what do we build on Rosh Hashanah? Tamlichuni Alech, and we build Malchus. And we build it both, as I said, in heaven, divine, and when God is significant in our lives, then of course we become significant because we are God's servants. We are God's children. And when you love God, you love what God loves. And that's His creatures, His human beings, His children. So these days is about building a sense of service, that we are serving Kabbalah Seil Malchus Shamayim. We are accepting that our lives are not just about my own self-interest and what is important to me. I'm accepting something beyond me. But not just beyond me, a reality that is a true reality instead of the false or superficial reality that is our lives, the material world. And that's what we do, beginning with Shefer, beginning with Tamlichuni Aleichem on Rosh Hashanah, and now we build it day by day. So on the first day, if it's according to one day, you start with Chachmeh, the Chachmeh within Malchus. So you use your mind to conceive of what's necessary to allow this Malchus to blossom. Bina, the Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, and so on. Or the other opinion, it goes the other way, from Malchus upward. Again, I don't want to go into more detail than this. If you want more detail, my book, 60 Days, I actually go into specifics of each of these days. And it's easy to find online, or email us, and we'll be happy to send you the actual 10 steps, so to speak, what to build in these 10 days of Teshuva. But overall, suffice it to say that it's about introspection, looking at your life, looking at the parts of your life which are old habits, things that should be discarded or at least minimized, and trying to refresh and bring that type of almost newness of childhood, a type of free abandon and a free-spiritedness into our lives as the year begins anew. And we're told that Rosh Hashanah we get Kabbalah Seil for the entire year, and Yom Kippur we get Kedusha for the entire year, Sukkot we get Simcha for the entire year. So it's not just specific details, this is actually the central nervous system that affects the rest of the entire year. So this is a brief overview of the Aseret Yemei Teshuva. Each day, as I said, closer to the nitzutz, getting closer, the moyer getting closer to the nitzutz, or the other way around. Sometimes it says the spark gets closer to the source gets closer to the spark, but either way, they begin to sense each other, and more importantly, we begin to sense that element, and that requires effort. If you just go around doing the same things you did yesterday, 2 days ago, well, not yesterday and 2 days ago, it was Yom Tov and Shabbos, but what you were doing last year, you're obviously going to get the same results. However, if you go with an attitude that your spark is closer to the source, and you allow the tug to be felt, and you do shed a tear of joy, shed a tear of missing God, and missing what God represents, missing Mashiach, missing the Rebbe, and so on, then you are able to sense and experience some of what the power of the Aseret Yemei Teshuva is. Now, of course, it's also called Aseret Yemei Teshuva. Why Teshuva? Because Teshuva means return. You're returning to the real you instead of the fake you. You're turning to the real essence of who you really are, not the superimposed, projected you that has the different masks and the different projections and the different attitudes that we wear to satisfy this one and that one and so on. You're going back to the real core self. Next question in this regard. I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but as you know, it's harder to be critical on myself than on my peers. This year I want to change and become a better person. Do you have any advice on how to be more introspective? How can I identify my own blemishes and areas in my life that need to be corrected? How can I truly take advantage of this time as an opportunity to grow as a person, as a spouse, as a parent, as a co-worker, as a chassid, and as a human being of the world? Thank you. Okay, very good segue from where we are. And this question should be one that we should all be asking. That's exactly what we're supposed to be doing now, looking inside ourselves. So one of the psukim we say, especially in the tefillas and the prayers that we say, Mema'amakim korasicha Hashem. Mema'amakim, from our depths. From the depths we call to God. Chassidus explains, why doesn't it say me'oimik? From the depth. We have one depth, we have a heart, the depths of the heart. So you don't just call from your heart, you call from the depth, but it's depths, lashon rabbim. So there's the explanation is because there's more than one depth. There's emek reim, there's emek tachas. There's the depth on high and there's the depth down low. There's also levels of depths within us, because ma'amakim, as explained in different mamorim, doesn't just mean two. When you say two, it means many levels. That means, number one, that each of us has our own so-called relative depth, relative to who you are. And in yourself, you can go from one depth to the next depth. And that's the objective here. And when we reach in the deepest part of ourselves, that reaches in the deepest part of the divine. Because it's midah keneged midah. But midah she'adam meided, the measure that we measure ourselves, that's how you will be measured. Which makes sense. Cause and effect. Action, reaction. You open a small door, you get a small door in return, maybe a little more. Yes, and sometimes it says you open a small door and God gives you a lot more pischei shalulam. But obviously, the more you open, the more result you will get. And that's the role of the Chassidus Applied, is to look inside ourselves in new ways. So I want to suggest a few things that each of us can do. This is based completely on the Maimorim and the Sichos of the Rebbe, the Maimorim of Chassidus in general, the Maimorim and Sichos of the Rebbe in particular. And that is, we should designate every day of these 10 days of Teshuva should be different than another day in the year. Now, the Rebbe brings in different places that the days of Chassidus Applied, of course, has 2 days Rosh Hashanah, 1 day Yom Kippur. But then there's 7 days in between. Those 7 days are always the 7 days of the week. And the Rebbe brings from different places that each day corresponds to all the days of the year. So it's not just another day. Every Sunday in the Chassidus Applied, today is Sunday, it has a power to affect all Sundays of the entire year. Every Monday, all Mondays. So it makes sense that when you have a day that's going to impact 52 weeks of this year, which means 52 coming Sundays, you should pay more attention, because one act today is going to affect 52 times as much as if you just choose a Sunday middle of the year. So I suggest we should all take this seriously. That's what it says. Take a few moments every day. It could be in the morning when you say Mada'ani, it can be in the evening, it can be in the middle of the day. But make it, biting off more than you can chew usually doesn't work, so do it in a sizable way that you know you can do it. Take 5 minutes and focus in on ma'amakim, on your own inner depths. What's going on inside of you? Not your chores and responsibilities for the day, not your job, not even your commitments to your family, all very important. Go into your own soul. Try to strip away as much as possible of the externals that you're so immersed in, and talk to yourself. Talk to your neshama. Let your neshama talk to you. Do it quietly. It can be during davening, if this is actually the essence of what davening is supposed to be. And by doing that alone creates a certain element of taking it seriously. And so things open up when people do that. I can't tell you what exactly is going to happen. Each of us, it may be something else. But it could be a very pure moment that can spill over. So that's one thing that we should all do. That's on a level of machshava, you can say, a little more of a contemplative experience. The second thing is in dibur. Go and say something nice to somebody, more than you would have done regularly. Go out of your way and reach someone. We'll soon be talking about forgiveness, and people may have hurt and asking forgiveness, which of course is in dibur primarily and also in your heart, but also actually expressing, I am sorry, and someone else saying, I acknowledge you're sorry and I forgive you. So dibur also includes saying something but special, not the usual, to your children, to family members, to your spouse, to friends, or to strangers. And in Maisa, of course, we add more in tzedakah, but don't just do it by rote. Think about it. That's part of the ma'amakim. It's part of your reaching deeper inside yourself. And yet, taka add more in quantity and in quality, with a broader smile, a little happier. These practical things, I know people say, well, what's so brilliant about what I just said? Well, nothing may be brilliant, but this is what Chassidus says, and it comes down to taka machshava dibur maisa, and if we actually did it with intention and not mechanically, it opens doors. So this is the so-called the most direct approach if you want to create some change, by actually acting in a changed way. If you act in a changed way, the reaction will be a changed one. The cause is changed, the effect will be changed. The second point is, I've said machshava dibur maisa. The second point would be, we all know that it's a language that's used, especially relevant to Chassidus Applied, that kol hanegoyim adam reya, a person sees all blemishes, chutz min negoy atzmi, except his own blemishes. Every blemish you see on someone else is, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's definitely far more amplified when you have the same blemish. As a matter of fact, you may have the blemish far deeper, and you'll see it far greater by someone else. That's part of avas atzmi, adam karev etzel atzmi. Self-love blinds avim b'chasa, I'll call David. Love covers up and distorts everything. So we're biased. Now, there's nothing per se bad about being biased, because that's how God created us. It actually becomes a tool for chayecha kaidmin, when you have to self-preservation, protect yourself. Of course, you have to be biased in some way. But when it becomes a problem is when you convince yourself you're not biased, or you start minimizing your own issues and maximizing others' problems. So knowing that means that we need to have a mashpia.
We need to have aseh l'charav. Hiros directly in the Torah, and of course directly given to us from the Rebbe time and again, especially, and we talked about them in Tafshin Lamed Zayin, and then especially in Tafshin Mem Vav and on. What does that do? If you allow yourself, you submit yourself, you surrender yourself to someone who you trust, but is able to give you a perspective that's fresh, and go to them sincerely and say, tell me, every year I hear that the Rabbeim added a new Hidr Rosh Hashanah. They added something new. It says in Samay Morim. And it says it's brought in the Siches. I want to do something new. What do you suggest, something that I can do in Sur Mara and Asay Tev? A midah, maybe a bad midah that I have. I'm judgmental. I'm impatient. I get angry. And let someone else help you identify it. And the awareness itself is have the cure, because what happens then is you begin to focus on it. Now, of course, I'm assuming that this question is coming from a sincere place. Sincere, well, you have to make effort. Everything comes with work. And the same thing I say, Tev, something you can add. So one thing is to cut out some weeds in your garden, and another thing is to plant a few new flowers, a new midah that you can work on, being more pleasant, knowing how to say thank you more, acknowledging, all kinds of different things one people can choose. It's always best to have someone who personally knows you, because then they can identify something that is tailored to your situation. These are both the simple and profound Jewish universal tools that Torah, and especially Chassidus Applied, teach us in how to become a mensch, better mensch than we are. And we do it with sincerity, with tamimus. There's no question that God responds. It's all commensurate to our effort. Okay, let's move on. Let's move to the issue of forgiveness. Because in many ways, these days are captured by the words we say in the davening, Slach lanu, Machal lanu, Kaper lanu. We'll say it many times in Yom Kippur. You may slicha kapara, slicha mechila kapara. There's different expressions all about forgiveness. Forgiveness seems to be a central theme in this period of time, and actually accelerates as we get closer to Yom Kippur. As a matter of fact, there's an entire simin Shulchan Aruch Tafreish Vav. That's an Eirech Chaim 606, simin 606 in Hilchos Yom Kippurim, in Tur and Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, which we have from this section, that is dedicated completely to She'ifayis Odem Es Chaverei Be'erev Yom Kippur. That a person should console, may be the right technical word, but it's also to reconcile with and come to terms with and make up with if there was any grudges or grievances either way. And this goes both ways, as we shall soon discuss. Both in a way where you have to ask for forgiveness, and you also have to offer forgiveness. You have to also forgive. And we'll discuss that in a moment after I read a few of the questions. But of course, this is all connected to what? To God forgiving us. We also ask God for forgiveness for things we did bein adam l'makom, between us and God. But the siman of Shulchan Aruch begins, Aveiros shebein adam l'chaverei ein Yom Kippur mechaper. I'm reading straight from the Shulchan Aruch. That a thing between people, you can't just turn to God and say, I want you to forgive me what I did to someone else. No, you did it to that person, you didn't do it to God, you have to go back to that person. You can't go to the wrong person. Or to, in this case, to God instead of the person. And God basically says, get their forgiveness, then I'll give you my forgiveness. Interesting also, as the Alter Rebbe brings that in Siman Tafreish Vav Siv Ches, he says, Afal Pisha B'chol Hashana. Even though all year round, it's important that a person, it's important that a person may be mafayis and reconcile and be in good terms with others. Immediately after they've in any way hurt somebody or in any way abused someone else, nevertheless, on the day before Yom Kippur, we have to be more careful, extra careful. Kedei, and here's the Alter Rebbe's reason, of course, brought from the Ramah, from the Tur rather, Kedei sheyeh leiv kol Yisrael shalom, because the heart of all Israel should be complete. Zeh im zeh, one with another. V'lo yehei mokum l'soten l'katrig aleim. There should be no room for the negative energies and negative forces to be mekatrig, to in any way find some fault with us. So it's about being complete, and being complete includes being complete with each other. Sadly, we see in our communities and I don't want to be the one that carries this message, but I'm just expressing what we all observe. We see divisiveness. We see grievances. We see people hurting each other, pettiness, grudges that last who knows how long. Well, this is the day of the year, Erev Yom Kippur, but we're talking now that all the days before that we have to correct that. It's one of the hardest things to do. The joke they tell about these two guys who were always best friends, and then they end up in their older years in a nursing home. They're not talking to each other for 30 years. They're not talking to each other. When before those 30 years, they were the best friends. And as they get older, someone comes and tells them, Dad, it's your best friend. You guys are not going to live forever. Why don't you make up? He says, because if I speak to him, he'll think he was right. So the pride and the principle we stand on, sometimes from mamish narishkeit, things that don't last, that will not last generations, we allow it to completely become a cancer, a disease that eats us up alive. I'm not here to preach to anyone. Everybody has to look into their own hearts. But being that I do have this platform, and it's these days, and this is words in Shulchan Aruch, words in Chassidus, so we have to recognize this is a very critical component. If you can't let go of something from last year, from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, how exactly is new energy going to enter into your life? So you're standing and asking God for brachas, and you say, please give me things that you didn't give me till now, or give me more of whatever it was, parnosa, health, nachas from children. But no, I'm carrying a grudge against somebody that I'm not refused to let go of. What is the response from heaven on that thing like that? If God has mechmanis, he may overlook it and so on. But let's be honest, cause and effect, mita keneged mita, God will say, you can't overlook somebody and you want me to overlook what you did. You can't let go of your past and you want me to give you a new future. It's like, you want me to bring new furniture into your home? Get the dust out of your house first. Because as soon as you bring the new furniture, it's also going to get dusty. I'm going to give you a blessing for the new year. And what will happen? It will become smudged and defiled by your negative thoughts about other people. So that's essentially, if you go a little deeper, what the meaning of this din is. It means you want newness, you have to bring newness, and you have to bring a new attitude. And that begins, yes, the hardest place of all, our attitude to people that we think may have hurt us. And maybe they actually did hurt us. So you have a whole siman Shulchan Aruch that talks about it in detail. And frankly, if you read it, it's fascinating. The psychological, I think it's one of the most profound psychological insights, to see the wisdom of the Torah in the most revealed way, the wisdom of the Torah, in this psychological sense of the word, which is so much the theme of what we're discussing in MyLife, Chassidus Applied, is right here, smack in this siman in Shulchan Aruch, Tov Reish Vav. And especially you compare it to the Tur and Shulchan Aruch of the Mechaber and the Ramah, and the Alter Rebbe's few nuances that he changes, tremendous lessons. And I'll point out right now a few of them, but let me read a few questions, and then we'll go back to the actual siman about forgiveness. Question 1. I've been a victim of a horrible firing experience. I live in a small community and was teaching children successfully that one evening without any notice, warning, or complaint. Meaning the principal never criticized my work. She told me not to come in because she didn't have money to pay. I begged her to tell me if anyone ever complained about me, and she said no. Without getting into all the details, Rav told me to take her to Bezdin, which my husband did not allow me to do because he said it's too small of a community to put up such a fight. Anyways, you can imagine I still suffer from this injustice in different ways because it affected my reputation somewhat and made it difficult to get hired in other places. I'm very aware that everything is Ashgacha Pratis and Baruch Hashem do not constantly dwell on this matter. I'm generally besimcha and I'm now doing other types of work, including tutoring. How can I fully forgive her without the slightest grudge? The principal has since gone through major difficulties in her personal life, and I'm wondering what I could do to enable her to fix the wrong. Sorry for the length. These questions have been on my mind for a while. Question number 2. Instead of answering each one individually, let me just address them all together because there's a lot of overlap. How come Chassidim always tell over the story of how Misnagdim gave much pain to the Frierdiker or Alter Rabbeim or the Heit Teva story? If we have to forgive and forget, why are speakers bringing up these stories? If someone damaged you, question number 3, if someone damaged you, stole money, etc., don't they have to repay what they stole according to halacha before asking for forgiveness? Question number 4, are there any exceptions to granting someone forgiveness such as an unforgivable sin? How is forgiving going to help an evil person do tshuva? Question number 5, I think you have spoken in a past episode about forgiveness, but I'm wondering if you could expound on it, because for myself,
Even though I know everything comes from Hashem and do not often dwell on negative experiences from others, I'm still finding it hard to totally forgive. How can one forgive without forgetting? How do we get even a minute amount of hatred, grudge out of our system? Question number 6. I understand learning from Yosef HaTzadik to try to transcend the past abuse and get on with my life. That was something I discussed in episodes 7 and 8 from Tanya, where Tanya, at the end of chapter 12, talks about grudges as well as tina and grudges and grievances and so on. So that's what they're referring to here. So how can I understand learning from Yosef HaTzadik to try to transcend the past abuse and get on with my life. But what about a case of a former abuser who doesn't ask forgiveness but would rather let bygones be bygones? How do you relate to such a person in the present? Is there a case for forgiveness even when the perpetrator doesn't ask forgiveness or even acknowledge past sins? Or that only be to my detriment? I'm not talking about telling him if I forgive or not, since it's not even become a topic for discussion. I'm talking about within my own heart. And finally, question number 7. A very close relative managed to get me involved in a business deal without my knowledge or permission. A vast sum of money was lost. I now have creditors for millions, liens on the house I live in, and no menuchas hanefesh for the past several years, with no end in sight. This was a total betrayal and no doubt the material for a criminal suit in court. This person has asked me through a mutual friend for mechila, forgiveness, but has made no effort to repay me a penny or sort out the damage, despite being a successful professional with a sizable income. Does mechila allow one to burn down a neighbor's house and then simply say, oy vey, I'm really, really sorry, but you should move on already? As a woman, I never studied damages, but I believe that part of tshuva is repaying the one who you caused to suffer. This is not the case for this is not a case for Bezdin. I simply have seen too much corruption there, and the other party is a bigger name. There is unfortunately no one that this person will listen to, so approaching his mashpia is also not going to work. Okay, so that's been a mouthful of, I would say, a pretty good cross-section of many, many, I am sure, experiences that some of you probably share or have had something similar, or you may know people. That's why I wanted to cover the gamut as much as I could. There were actually more questions, but I just can't read them all. So summing up, I wanted to sum up the questions in short. Why is forgiveness so important? Do we have to forgive? Are there unforgivable sins? Do we have to ask for forgiveness? What are obligations in forgiving and asking for forgiveness? Can we forgive and not forget, or forget and not forgive? What happens when someone refuses to forgive us, or when someone who has hurt us refuses to ask us for forgiveness? So here I refer all of us to the laws of Hechels Erev Yom Kippurim, Siman Tafresh Vav, as I said, and Eirech Chaim Shulchan Aruch, Tur, Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe. We go straight to the Alter Rebbe, which I'm reading from, and you can compare, obviously, the text, and you'll see different, as I mentioned, nuances. So a few key points that he makes. The Alter Rebbe says very clearly, as I read earlier, that it's a mitzvah. If you've hurt someone, you are obligated to go ask for forgiveness in sincere way, not lip service. And it says if the person does not respond, you're obligated to go again. In Siv Beis, the Alter Rebbe, Einer mispayis b'pam harishin, yachzer v'yelech lefaisei pam beis, b'min zitzui acher, with a different type of expression, with a different type of soothing, or a different way of reconciling, a different way of appeasing. Which means it's not just a mechanical thing. You have to think about am I going to say it in different terms? Because you're trying to reach the person. And if the second time that doesn't work, he says, Imle Spice, go a third time. Again use different words or different expressions. And he says, every time you should take with you along 3 people, and you should do it in front of them. And after that, you're not responsible any further, after 3 times. Nevertheless, you should notify people, 10 people, that you did it, and that person refuses or does not want to accept your request for forgiveness, because you want to show people that it was not your pride. He says clearly, that people should not suspect that you did not want to be machniya, you didn't want to subjugate yourself before your friend and ask mechila. Then he goes on, speaks with the teacher, it's even more obligations, but then he says,
But even with an individual, if you want to be stricter on yourself, you should go more than 3 times too. That's din 1. He gives an exception with Bezoyin Tate. I don't want to go into that because there are some exceptions, as we'll soon see, in this regard. Now comes an interesting thing. There's also the other way around. The person on the receiving end, the one that was grieved, the one that was hurt, you can say, okay, your job is to ask. Who says he has an obligation to offer? Maybe you hurt him so badly, he doesn't want to forgive you. No. You should not be cruel and not forgive immediately. In other words, as soon as you ask for forgiveness, you should respond. Don't wait, in other words, 3 times. Elim Cain, but here is a fascinating 2 exceptions, which if you look in the source, which is the Ramah, in the same Siman, you'll see in the Taz a whole discussion about it based on a Gemara. Again, here's not the place to go into the whole pilpul, but it's a fascinating statement what he says here, which is tremendous lessons. He says, Elim Cain, here 2 exceptions the Alter Rebbe gives when you do not have to forgive. I'm reading it straight from Shulchan Aruch. Elim Cain, hu miskaven letevis hamavakish mechila. That the person who should be forgiving intends for the benefit of the one that's requesting forgiveness, kedei sheyichna levove ha'orel, in order for his locked and his trapped heart, his closed heart, should be subdued even more. You're entitled not to forgive him because you feel that he needs more subjugation, more bittul, more achna. Imagine that. It's the only case where we're given that right. Why? Because you are the one that was hurt. And therefore you have a right to determine if you feel that that your intention is his benefit, not your pride, not saying, hey, listen, and this you may need to have an objective party. How do you know it's not your pride? You can convince yourself, I'm ready to forgive him, but he needs to be humbled more. So we have to not abuse this halacha. But there is that exception. And exception number 2, Oi, so he doesn't have any fear that it'll cause him any damage. If you forgive the other person, it can cause you damage. Then, because your life precedes the life of your friend, which is also fascinating. I've used this a number of times, and this covers definitely the area where we talk about real abuse, parents abusing children, or people who've truly abused somebody to the point of damage. So even if you figure out ways to heal, it causes damage, and by forgiving the person, you may get hurt. Why? Because you may have overlooked and not healed properly. And sometimes forgiving a person is not the right way to go. It's very, very clear here. If it can hurt you. Now, make sure that we're not subjective about it, because we can always be not forgiving for other reasons that are not correct. We must run this by an objective party. The Alter Rebbe does not say that. I assume he relies that would be the next logic, because like anything, I say l'charav, how do you know for sure that Alter Rebbe is stating that's the case? But for you to make sure that you are abiding by these 2 conditions, it would be wise to talk to an objective party. Then he goes on with shemra. If someone says shemra, you don't have to be meichel if someone spread a bad rumor about you or gossip. Why? Because you're asking for forgiveness is not enough. The person who did it. Now everybody else out there. It's a famous example with the feathers in the pillow. You said something bad about someone. Now everybody slandered someone. So now the feathers in the pillow, go gather all the feathers together. Everybody out there has to now be told that the whole thing was not it was a shemra. But interestingly, even there, so therefore forgiveness is not a mitzvah there, because the damage is so severe and irreversible in many cases. But the Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe says, nevertheless, he says, Makom mokim midas anova, the mid of anova, humility, is limchel afilu beitzah shemra, is to forgive even in that case. So we can elaborate more on that, just stating it for the record. Now, what is this thing with forgiveness anyway? What is it? So here let's go into a little deeper understanding of the word mechila. Hebrew word mechila. I found it in one place in the Rebbe Sichos, in I believe it's Chof of Tovshan Lametes. The Rebbe connects mochel, which is a dance, a circle, with mechila, with forgiveness. That when you forgive, it brings a deeper joy, a deeper simcha. But the word mechila, the root of mechila is machal, mem ches lamed. There's another meaning of machal, as I just said, is a circle. In a seamless, healthy world, where we do not hurt each other, and everything was working the way God planned it, say like Gan Eden Mekedem, Gan Eden before Chet Tzadas. Everything was like a complete circle. Think of it like a circuit, a complete circuit. When there was the first sin, the first disconnect, because Aveda comes from the word Havara Mereshus L'Shus, you moved away, a displacement, just like mitzvah means connection, and Aveda means a disconnection. So when there was the first disconnection, the first dissonance, what happened? The circle was broken. When a person hurts another person, the circle is broken between the two of you. When you forgive, the circle becomes complete. That's why mechila is machal. It's a complete circle. But here's the fascinating thing. We think of forgiveness as just between two people. The real fact of the matter is that forgiveness is really our obligation. Why do we have to forgive? You could say that person should ask for forgiveness. Why do we have to forgive? Because in a way we're forgiving ourselves. In a way we're completing the circle in our own lives, because you remain obsessed and consumed that person has hurt you. And you can't free yourself from that. So there's a broken circle inside you yourself as well. So even if a person doesn't come to ask for forgiveness, you still can be obsessed with it. And your life can be shattered by it. Or maybe not shattered, but definitely haunted by it. So learning to forgive is learning to let go. This doesn't mean to forget. It doesn't mean the person doesn't have to do tshuva. But like he says in Ageres HaKedesh Siman Chaf Aleph, and we talked about it back then in episodes 7 and 8, about anger, it's about you recognizing, I had to for some reason go through this experience, I've learned my lesson, I let go. Let that person figure out their life, they're no longer affecting my life. Because that's what so much of hurt does. The person continues hurting you because they're haunting you with the hurt that they did in the past. And you want to close that circle. You want to be a complete person. So mechila is far deeper than just forgiving someone. Obviously, the full circle would be if that person comes to you and you with sincerity and you accept it, and it works with all the conditions and so on. But even if that doesn't happen, or a person died before they asked for forgiveness, so what happens now? The rest of your life has to become your victim? You have to be suffering? You have to learn to forgive yourself, because often that's what children especially do. They blame themselves for the hurt others impose upon them, because they simply can't accept that person could have hurt them. That's why children blame themselves for divorce of parents, God forbid, or they blame themselves for other abuse, which they need therapy to come to say has nothing to do with you, did nothing wrong. But you often feel, I must have done something wrong, or why else would they have done it? So forgiveness includes forgiving yourself, but it includes closing the circle. Mechila machal. It's a form of cleansing, it's a form of completion. And if you think of it that way, it's literally healthy for you. Regardless of what that person is. Our carrying and holding on, and we say, I want that person to suffer. I want to get even. Yes, is a human tendency. But as they say, and this is not a Jewish quote, but it's very fitting with a Jewish quote, to err is human, to forgive is divine. And the same thing with Hashem, with us. Because Hashem could also say, hey, you made a mistake. It may even be deliberate. Why should I close the circle? Because we want to bring back the seamlessness, the wholeness of what real life is meant to be. So forgiveness in that sense, mechila, becomes a tremendous tool in kiruv hamoira lanutzitz, because it's about bringing source with the flame together. And if there's any type of haunting toxins that toxify and haunt your life and consume you, there's a block. The circuit is not complete. The electricity can't flow because there's an obstruction. And that's why we cleanse that out so much, so important to experience forgiveness in this period of the year, Teshuva, leading to Yom Kippur. So it's all about one big circle, the circle of the Tzelem Elokim, yourself, that your divine image should be complete. You know, they say that animals will not attack a human being because they see the Tzelem Elokim, they see the divine image. So of course we see the question, we see animals attacking humans because they don't see the Tzelem Elokim, because ayeka, like God said to Adam, and the Alter Rebbe explains it, where are you? I don't recognize you. You know, sometimes you could be sitting near someone and they space out. They're physically there and you say, well, where are you? Where's your presence? I don't feel you're with me. So Tzelem Elokim, the divine image, can be concealed with a mask, and then the animals can attack. When Daniel was in the lion's den,
He had the Tzelem Elokim, therefore they just were docile. They didn't attack. They didn't touch him. The same is true. We are complete when we reflect the divine image which seamlessly flows through us. When Adam ate from the tree in Chava, he hid himself. As the Alter Rebbe explained to that minister. Not he hid himself, God didn't know where he is. I don't recognize you. You're not the person I created. It's not the image that I created. There's something else going on. There's some shadow. There's some disconnect. There's a broken circle. So when we ask forgiveness and do tshuva, we complete the circle with our Tzelem Elokim. We complete the circle with Hashem, who put us here. That who we are becomes connected to what you do. Who you are becomes connected to why you were put here in this earth by God. And all that is the essence of these 10 days of tshuva and the dignity we spoke about of Malchus leading to Yom Kippur. Thus, all the importance of forgiveness is not just on the smallest level, it's just asking people for forgiveness. And of course, I believe I don't even have to qualify. People often tell you jokingly, yes, she or he hurts me every year, then they, I'm sure, get the prerequisite Erev Yom Kippur call. I'm meichel me, yeah, but I'm meichel you, and then next day they do it again. At some point you tell them, listen, don't call me Erev Yom Kippur, don't hurt me, and you don't have to call me. So obviously this mechanical lip service, I don't know if it has any benefit. It may be better than nothing, I'm not sure. Because it could also become something that is meaningless. Obviously the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, with the Ritzui and all this type of attempts, clearly you're talking about from the heart, and you're talking about sincerity, and you're talking about really letting go, and really acknowledging remorse. It's one of the hardest things to do, but it's divine to forgive, and it's divine to ask for forgiveness also, I should add. Even though that may not be the statement that Alexander Pope said, he's the one that said, to err is human. He's an English poet from the 17th century. But it's also to ask and to give. And that's ultimately what Moshe Rabbeinu did on Har Sinai right now. These are the end of the last 40 days when he was on Mount Sinai asking what? For forgiveness. And what did Hashem say? Salachti kidvarecha. That's Yom Kippur night. The greatest statement. And this leads me to the next question. Why is Yom Kippur the holiest day of the year? And how can it change my life? Before I go there, I just want to answer the question, are there unforgivable sins? The answer is, well, based on the Shulchan Aruch, yes, there could be unforgivable sins in the case where a person has not had the achnah, or it's his benefit that he not be forgiven. It may not be an unforgivable sin, but it could be he's still in a state where he needs more so-called remorse and more humbling and so on. Are there unforgivable sins? Motzei Shemra is another category, though Mitzad Anova, humility, the Alter Rebbe says a person should go beyond the letter of the law. But generally speaking, there may be sins that are not forgivable, but you have to learn to forgive yourself, as I said, and the soul, so that your soul can be complete, the circle should be complete. So why is Yom Kippur the holiest day of the year? Good quiz. Ask your children, ask yourself. Most people have no clue. I asked this a number of people, and they told me it's Gzeres HaKosov. The Eibishter could have chosen Tu B'Shvat, it's true. He could have chosen also Yud Aleph Nisan. He could have chosen Rosh Chodesh El. He chose the 10th day of Tishrei. But why? Because even if it's taka that way, of course, the 10th day of Tishrei has its own power, Yochid, Achaz, B'Shana, etc. But the answer is very obvious when you know the story. What happened in Yom Kippur? So besides the fact that it says in the Pasuk that it's the Kedesh Kedoshim and it's the holiest day of the year and so on, something happened. Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain with second tablets. With what? With forgiveness. It's the birth of hope, the single greatest gift that we have. Because we're not perfect human beings. So you could argue a person made a mistake, that's it. You can't, irreversible. The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu fought with God, literally, read Parshat Kisisa, all that happened the days before Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur. The fact that he fought with God, for what? He wanted that door. Give us the door of hope. The ability that we know that we can correct something we did wrong. Yes, we will need remorse and we'll need forgiveness and we'll ask for forgiveness. That's what we do. On Rosh Hashanah and more so on Yom Kippur. But give us the ability to know that if we ask, you can open the door. And God, I'm just paraphrasing, said to Moshe Rabbeinu, he didn't agree right away. So, if it's so simple, Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain, he saw the golden calf, Shivasar B'Tammuz, he broke the tablets, he marches back up. What happens? Hashem says, no, I'm not forgiving them. 40 days, it says, you may cast, days of wrath. God would not forgive. And for good reason. They did the greatest possible betrayal, very deliberate. It wasn't an accident. They built a false god.
The ultimate betrayal, Avodah Zarah Mamish, a golden calf. 39 days after they heard it. What was Moshe thinking? How did he expect suddenly that God's going to say, oh, you know what? Okay, they made a mistake. Let's move on. This is the equivalent of a total betrayal of having of a total betrayal of a marriage in the worst possible way. A false God, another God. And only 39 days later, from the chuppah at Har Sinai, Moshe was saying, human beings are human beings. They made a mistake. They'll be accountable and they'll be punished. But I need you to tell me that we can do something to fix, to reconcile after a betrayal. And Hashem said, I'm paraphrasing, but the world is cause and effect. You put your hand in fire, you get burned. What do you want me to do? Want me to change the laws of nature? And Moshe said, yeah. You created the laws of nature. The hand is in fire. You made the hand. They made the fire. You made the hand gets burned. I'm asking you for a back door. I didn't say go disrupt all of existence. And Moshe argued 40 days he was not successful. Or you can say he was, but it wasn't yet apparent. He kept knocking on the door. Comes down, comes back up Rosh Chodesh to come down 40 days later on Yom Kippur. So all this period of time, Rosh Hashanah, Moshe was not in shul with the Eden, blowing shofar. He was up on Har Sinai arguing with God until Yom Kippur. What time Yom Kippur, I'm not even sure what time he came down. He must have come down before Ne'ilah, that's for sure. But maybe this says something in Sfarim if anybody finds anything. What did Moshe Rabbeinu finally prevail? Moshe Rabbeinu ultimately said to the Eibishter, look, there's a structure, you're right. There's Torah mitzvahs. And it's a cause and effect. You do this, this happens. Middah keneged middah. But you need to give me one day in the year, one moment where people can fix something they broke. And they have to earn their right. Yes, they will ask for forgiveness. And Eibishter said, Salachti kidvarecha. What are the first words we say right after Kol Nidrei? After we free ourselves from the bonds of our past? That God 3 times, Salachti kidvarecha, the greatest statement in history where a man prevailed over God. And God was not so cooperative. And ultimately prevailed. And God says, yes, you have prevailed over me. I will forgive them. Salachti. I will give them that door. And that's Yom Kippur. That's the holiest day of the year. Rosh Shavuos is a great day, but it's not the holiest day of the year because that's when we receive the law. And on Yom Kippur, we received the power of Tshuva. It took 40 days to receive the law. It took 80 days to get hope. The holiest day of the year. Because we have the ability to begin anew, completely anew. And that's why it's a Yom Slicha Mechila Kapara between ourselves and God. You know, for more sources, a bit on bits, and so you ask, how can it change your life? Well, tell me, if this can't change your life, what can? That means nothing is impossible. Whatever has happened yesterday, 2 days ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, can be changed in one day. The day itself has the power. How much more so if we make an effort as well? So yes, it tells us that we have one day we can go right back into Atzmus itself, higher than the whole Seder Shtalshus, higher than all cause and effect and all the rules. If you do it right, you can break down that door and you can open up a Pesach Shel Tshuva, a door that allows you to actually change the past and of course change the future, change destiny. This is something that's not mortal. It's an immortal force given to us. To forgive is divine. It's a divine force that is allowed into our lives. I mean, I don't know if there's a greater gift than that. So if someone says, I'd love to have a perfect life, it's a nice thought, but it's not realistic. What we should ask for is, I want to have a life that whatever challenge that comes my way, whatever mistake I make, and I'll try not to make any, I know I can fix. Any betrayal can be reconciled. There's a lesson in marriage, it's a lesson in relationships with children, it's a lesson where people think they burned all the bridges, they think there's no more hope, personally or with others. Yom Kippur says absolutely, unequivocally no, and Moshe Rabbeinu fought with God for this. And Yom Kippur, we have the opportunity to access that power every year, that time. Salachti kidvarech. Unbelievable when you think about it. Often you grow up with it, you take it for granted, but when you really think, it's an unbelievable lesson in life. It's the thing what everybody wants to know. Is there a second chance? Is there a third chance? Now obviously, echte v'oshuv, it's not, you can go in and say, you know what, I'll make a whole year of new mistakes. There's always Yom Kippur coming. It's not that simple. Ein kateger nasa kateger, ein kateger nasa seneger, both ways. A prosecutor can't become a defense. You can't suddenly use the sins to suddenly go and say, you know what, I'm going to do tshuva. And all that, even though the Alter Rebbe says, Im dochak, when you really push it, you could even do that. But it's the power of hope, and of course in a sincere way. I want to give a few more sources, and being that we're already winding down here, I believe I covered most of the ground. Obviously, there's always room for more, as we can all see. So there's a few more. There's a sikha that the Rebbe speaks in Chukas, Tov Shem Mem Dalet, Shabbos Parshas Chukas, Tov Shem Mem Dalet. It was a Rashi that brings actually the whole concept of that we were discussing here about not being achzori, not to be cruel in forgiveness. So that's a sikha that actually later was developed into a Lakutei Sikha in Chelik Chav Ches, page 141. So refer there. There he talks about three different levels of mechila for the person, for yourself, and so on. So that's something I would definitely recommend everyone look up. I also want to refer you to Ageres HaTshuva, of course, which is Ageres HaTshuva, where the Alter Rebbe talks about Daf Kuf. This is in where he talks about the mechila that we ask with the Eibishter and between each other and so on. And finally, there's two Igris Kodesh. One is volume 8. The letter is from Ches El Tovshin Tezvov. It's volume 8, I believe. Was it volume 11? One of the two, page 372. And another letter in, this is Chof Aleph Shvat, Tovshin Yud Zayin, page Shin Ayin Ches. I believe that's volume 16. If the volumes are off, I apologize. It can't always be perfect, and I ask for forgiveness. If that's the case, for some reason it wasn't marked clearly here. So, a human example to human is to err. It's very two powerful letters where the Rebbe talks about the importance of mechila and the importance of not carrying things and the importance of freeing yourself and freeing others, obviously, from the whole situation. So you could all look it up yourselves. If anybody has any sources, more material on these topics, obviously, as always, I please welcome you and I invite you to send it to us. And same thing with the questions. Send it to meaningfullife.com/MyLife Live. It's totally anonymous and confidential. Questions have been keeping on coming, especially in the last few weeks, more than ever. So I definitely address those as the weeks pass. But being that this is such a special period in time, hopefully, that this time itself and the efforts we make will eliminate all need for these episodes altogether. We can only focus on Yasei Tev, on growing in Kedusha, like the Alter Rebbe says at the end of Siman Chavav in Ageres HaKodesh, that once there won't be Sur Merah, once Mashiach comes, it'll only be holiest in Kedusha itself. I hope we can already reach that level and that we only focus on going from better to noch besser. If good is besser, nish besser idea. But meanwhile, since we still do have an issue or two, my pledge is to continue. I want to invite people who've offered to dedicate these episodes. If you want to dedicate an episode, it's a great schus for all those that listen and benefit from it. Please send us an email. You can send it directly to me, simon@meaningfullife.com, or give us information at that forum. Again, meaningfullife.com/MyLife Live. And obviously, everything is connected to costs. So there's a tzedakah connected to this, especially in these days when we increase in tzedakah. And I ask anyone who's willing to help in that sense. And next Sunday we will continue My Life with episode 37. I want to wish everyone a Gemar Chesimet Teva and a Shana Teva Masuka, a sweet and blessed year. Begashmis and Beruchnis, and Beruchnis and Begashmis, as the Rebbe says so often, both together, and all in with many Arichas Shanim V'Shanim Tevis, all healthy years, physical health, spiritual health, and that we should be zeicha to fulfill the shlichus that Rebbe has given us. And as we enter a new year with a renewed resolve, a renewed hachlotus, but one that lasts and is sustainable throughout the entire year. Again, this has been My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 36. Look forward to speak with you next week, Sunday, 8 to 9, episode 37. A good gebencht Yar.